this is all in the Warsaw Jewish Cemetery where I found my great-grandfather's grave. The person you saw. There's Lydia, another relative, the brother of the concert. Okay, there she is in Paris at the grave of Jacob Balgley and his wife Alice. There we are, Lydia and Lena. Other relatives that I met, Israeli relatives, their children and grandchildren. More of them. And what's so great is that they've grown into, they've married Vietnamese people and German people, and on it goes, yeah. So, but I want to take more questions. But what time is it? I'm
8:35.
8:45. Okay, so we're just over an hour. That's not too bad. Okay. I know it's very important not to go over long. So, more questions or comments? Let me get back up here where I can see and hear. Yes, sir.
It's not a question, but we were in Vienna on holidays maybe 15 years ago,
Okay.
and we were brought through what was the Jewish quarter. And to fit in with your story of your experience in Poland, I was shocked, and I could not convince the tour guide that the Austrians had mistreated the Jews. She refused.
It is shocking.
Accept.
Yeah. And it really the Austrians, that was the heart of it, Nazism. That she wouldn't do it. I had a similar experience. I went to Leningrad with some of my Polish students, and because, we could travel there. They couldn't go anyplace else in the universe, but they could go there. And we had a guide, and she was showing us all the Orthodox cathedrals, Greek and Russian Orthodox and so forth. And so one of my students said, what about the synagogues? And she said, well, that's not in my tour. I don't include that. So
we had synagogues in Moscow in 80s, and I went to synagogue in 80s. So I decided to become a Jew, and it was very open to women, if you want to become a Jew, and if you want to become a religious. So it was very, very open in Russia, in Moscow.
In what year?
1986.
Okay. So I was there after that, actually.
So it's maybe
87 to 89.
Yeah, so it's
open from whom? From the Jewish community
No,
here?
it's open from political community and all together. Possibly it was 87, possibly will be the right one. 87, 88, 89, because it's where the years where you actually could join any religion in Russia
How
at
interesting.
that time. Because I went to synagogue and I decided to become a Jew in Moscow.
You can't sorry, can I answer that? You can't just become a Jew.
You could, because
You studied.
you could,
Studied.
Isn't Judaism on the mother's side?
no, because
That's
my
typically,
mother,
that's
but my mother
Israel's.
was a Jew.
Sorry, could I just
My
say
mother was a
something?
Jew.
Okay, one at a
Can I
time.
empathize with you? My grandfather came from Russia.
Yeah.
Through the pogroms, you said that word differently, pogroms or whatever way you said.
We had the pogroms in
In 1890, and he had to leave Russia in 1890, and he came to.
Oh, it was happening for centuries.
It was dreadful, but he.
The Tsar.
He went to South Africa,
Yeah.
married somebody, and then came to Ireland. But if you thought it was bad to be a Jew in Poland, it was equally bad to be a Jew in Ireland. The
Exactly,
Catholic
correct,
Church were very
correct.
anti-Jews.
Yes,
here.
they were. There's an entire history of it.
Complete rights month. They had the pogroms in Limerick in
Oh, yeah, that's
1980s.
right.
Yeah,
Oh,
in
not quite 1980.
no 1920s.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But it was, and not so tough on that book. It was lovely to hear you talk about it.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your report about that. And you're right, I have read about Ireland's history and being, half Irish. It's interesting, and being raised as a Catholic.
But Moscow,
You know.
I'm completely supportive. I'm completely impressed.
I want to look into that.
Completely impressed. And that time I wanted to become a Jew, and Jewish religion actually welcomed me.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that the,
It's, they
That the-
were,
that the
in
Jewish community-
1987, yeah, they were
can you speak to
absolutely
that,
welcome.
Lena? Because Lena, these people are from the Soviet Union and
Yeah,
they were
was
refusing,
she there?
and they
Well,
left.
She's too young, she was too young.
I am not young.
Yeah,
Okay, we've got
Tatiana
another
was
question.
there as well, but she was learned too young. I was there in 1987 when I joined the synagogue.
Yes,
You
ma'am.
possibly were born that time.
Yeah.
So I'm not exactly sure of the point you're making, but I'm gonna find out, and then I'm gonna find out its history, because I'm interested. But is there a way to turn that off now? Does anybody have enough brains? Because it's just blinding me, and it doesn't need to be on.
Patients pull the plug out.
Thank you, yeah, I
No
will.
technology.
Okay, there are, thank you, Lars. There are more questions, I think. Dermot, in the back? Yes, ma'am.
What languages did your father speak?
Yeah, that's a very good question. What languages did he speak? I had a really good Jewish friend in graduate school with whom I'm still friends, a writer and university teacher. And she asked my dad, so what language did you speak when you came to America? And he said, none. And so she turned to me and said, without him hearing, oh, then I guess it must have been Yiddish. That was the disdain that he had. His parents spoke Yiddish, but he also could speak Polish and Russian too. You know, they had to. They were on that border. You know, that was such a rich, still is, border area there. And now it's so contested because of Ukraine. Yes.
So when he went to Poland to meet you, he understood what they were saying, did he?
Well, you know, by then I was pretty good at Polish, but he had forgotten it or repressed it. You know what I mean? He never, the last thing he wanted to do was to keep that alive. One of the things he said to me when I won the Fulbright and decided to go was, why are you complimenting these people by learning their language and going to their country? You know, because he still had the view that has merit, that many American Jews feel about Poland being like one big death camp, and that anti-Semitism flourished there and still does. And to a large extent, well, you heard one of the moments, and I had other moments like that. But I also, like I said, it was because of a very, very generous Polish family that I met a woman a physician who had been a hidden child during the Holocaust, a Jewish woman. It was because of them that I met her, you know. So, you know, it's like everything. It's just that I have to say, I have problems with the sort of sweep the arm across all of Poland saying, you know, this was the worst place to be a Jew. Well, you know, it depends. They lived in relative peaceful coexistence for a number of centuries. It wasn't great. There were murders and pogroms that were terrible, and they've been documented. And they started early. The Tsar would regularly, for no apparent reason, attack shtetls and murder women, children, and men. Yeah, this has all been shown. We know this. But to today, or any time, to say this country is the worst of all of them, no, not so. Not so. Yes, sir.
Just one particular problem I have in following a lot of the history of Middle and Eastern Europe is borders. And that we cannot really talk about Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Czech Republic and so on, because they change so much.
Right.
And you were dealing with duchies and principalities and states and lander and whatever.
No question, you're right.
And it just makes it very difficult for us to assume that Poland is that and Belarus is that and
And you know what? That is so important because my husband and I just watched on public television in the United States 23 lectures by the Yale professor Timothy Snyder. If you don't know Snyder, look him up, S-N-Y-D-E-R. He's brilliant. He's written a number of books, but one he wrote was called Bloodlands, and it's a big study of this. And his thesis in these, it's all about Ukraine. That's why we wanted to watch it. He questions the whole idea of nationhood. How can there be that if there's all these shifting borders and people speaking different languages? And I learned so much from listening to these, just recently, just before we came to Ireland, listening to these lectures, because I learned more about Ukraine and how, what really, there were so many different people there initially. The people who were there, the Cossacks, the Tatars, were run out. You know, so he said his thesis really is be careful about making, you know, drawing any conclusions about borders because they're absolutely shifting, and especially in that part of the world.
And can I add to that, that having grown up in an Ireland where there was only one border in the middle of Europe,
An important
that
part.
got 3 Hail Marys at the end of every Mass for the conversion of what was out there.
Right, definitely. Well, listen, I have to tell you that when we have a home in Bantry. I'm not sure I mentioned that. I probably forgot to say that. We've been coming for almost 4 decades to Bantry, and so we're regularly in Dublin, my husband and I and our daughter. It was fun. Some years ago, I was in a writing group in Bantry, and it was amazing, the talent. This is the land of language and literature, bar none. Ireland is the place, you know. My husband and I were just part of the West Cork Literary Festival, and I was able to present there, as was he, on his book. And you know, I was in this writing group, and we would read, and it was just the beginning of my thinking about this book, and I read like a little piece of something. And at the break, this wonderful man who owned a pub, and Bobby Hanley has since passed away, and was a really good writer. He was writing all about Ken Mayer. Said to me, well, you know, I think Jews and Irish have a lot in common. And I said, I think you're absolutely right. You know, a suppression by, whether it's Russia or Britain, you know, religious issues and so forth, conflict. And I've never forgotten him saying that to me, because, you know, he might have thought otherwise, and I think he made a really good point. Other comments and questions? Yes.
Well, I loved the book, by the way. I mean, your stories are incredible. I'd just like to say that there is a huge wide issue here, about anti-Semitism in particular, which is that in the history of Christianity, in the very formation of it, it was formed in opposition to Jewishness. It was originally Christianity was a Jewish sectary, and then St. Paul became the apostle to the Gentiles, and he formed his version of Christianity in opposition to those followers of Jesus who remained Jewish. So it is at the very heart of Christianity, the persecution of Jews, and it is not acknowledged enough.
Definitely. Well, thank you for that. You know, I mean, during the World War II, I mean, the Pope said a lot of terrible things. You know, and the brown shirts, like Christy Moore's song said, the brown shirts were blessed and done weary. And off they went to fight for the fascists. But there was also another Christy Moore song that's about all of the Irish lads who died fighting in the Spanish Civil War, the anti-fascists. So, you know, I mean, there's a lesson there, and in a way it's an obvious lesson that we can't and shouldn't generalize. But trying to understand the sweep of history, we tend to generalize because we're trying to get a grip on understanding what's going on. And yeah, no, from the very beginning, well, the Crusades, for God's sake, you know. Yeah. You know.
It's cultural.
Yeah.
It's a cultural thing.
I was disturbed, though, just to read just the other night about the Irish mistreatment of the Jews, because I thought, damn it, I found a place where it didn't happen, and then they talked about what happened and how it was supported. So there's really no place to go, and it's still an issue. Yes.
Just a minor point from my own inexperience of life. I know several distant relations of mine, I'm happy to say, who went off to America over the period of the last 100 years, and they're all undoubted horrific bigots when they got there as soon as they got established. And the prejudiced against people lower down the scale of them once they got some property was appalling. And I met some of these older people when I was a child, and I was even then aware of just how out of touch they were with the modern. The swinging 60s, not only that, but the idea of equality.
Right, and you would think that people would identify with each other, being a member of a group. And I know that the Irish, I talked to Irish who said, you know, they'd gone to Boston and they had to compete with jobs with African Americans. And they began to like really be annoyed by that. Now we have Ukrainian refugees, and people have to take like a stand on what are you going to do about that? You know, in our town of Bantry, one of our favorite places, Catherine, originally from Bantry, our neighbor, now living in Dublin, the Bantry Bay Hotel which in 1984, when I first came to Ireland, that's where we stayed. Great place, great bar, great pub. Well, it's closed now because it's housing Ukrainians and the government is paying the hotel, you know. And so a lot of people have lost their jobs as a result. And this is where these resentments fester, you know. And, you know, you can't really be in a position to say, oh, how unfair, you know, because people feel that way. I think we're concluding, but I will be downstairs, and what I'm doing, and it's a very bizarre way to do this, because normally I have a big stack of books, but I don't, because they bought them all last night, and I was shocked. I was like, wait, but the delivery will come to, as Mary explained, it's a little tricky, to the Dublin Arts Club, and I will have your name and what you want signed on it, and I will be back to Dublin from Bantry, and I will sign it for you. And you can buy the book, whether you want a hardback or a softback, it's up to you. The hardback's in color, I think it's a better deal. It's a little more expensive, but it's worth it, I think. Yeah, you know. So I will be down in the bar, and